Hi, and welcome to another video. Today I'm going to talk about the best fantasy/sci-fi series I read this year. So I read so many fantasy books this year that in some cases I read several books of the same series. So I thought the best way to do it was to talk about the whole series. So that's what I'm doing today. So I have 5 series on this list, and most of these are fantasy. I think one of them only is sci-fi. So let's start with number 5. So the 5th series on this list is actually the sci-fi series, and it is the Binti series by Nnedi Okorafor. So this series is about this young girl called Binti. She is from Earth, and her tribe are called the Himba. The Himba are very particular in a way that they live as a close-knit community. They're really close with the land, and they're really closed off from the world. So it's expected that people stay within the tribe, marry within the tribe, and that people don't generally leave. So Binti is also very smart, and she has actually been accepted to one of the best universities in the galaxy, the UMSA University. So despite everyone telling her not to go, in a way, she decides to go because she wants to study, she wants to learn. So in this first book, we follow her while she makes the decision to leave, and in the second book where she returns home, and in the third book there's this big conflict which gets resolved, and Binti is somehow at the center of all of this. So what I liked about it is that I didn't need to invest a lot of time and effort in experiencing sci-fi, I guess, because I'm not really used to this genre, and this gave me a good insight into this really great universe that this author created. I think it's very particular and not so usual in a way, because it's really the author really draws from her own cultural background and from her own history and heritage in this one, and we see that through Binti's description of her tribe, to the way she dresses and the way she expresses herself. So I like that even though this is a sci-fi with some pretty usual, I guess, sci-fi tropes, it conveys this very universal message of acceptance, and I really like that. I think this is similar in a way to the message of The Black Witch I read by Laurie Forrest, which is my favorite fantasy novel of the year. So the next series on this list is Robin Hobb's The Farseer Trilogy. Now, I found out about this series from Mercedes's channel, from Mercy's Bookish Musing. She had a whole video dedicated to this realm of the Elderlings. I think this is the world Robin Hobb created, and this is the first trilogy in that world. I think she has like 3 or 4 trilogies. It's quite a commitment, and all of these books are kind of long. I mean, I think the first one wasn't that long, but the second 2, I only read the second, and I have the third one on Audible, and I think it's like 30 plus hours long. So if you really want to dig your teeth into some really long fantasy books where you get immersed in the world, this is the good one. So let me tell you what this is about. So this is kind of a medieval inspired fantasy. I would say a little bit more classical fantasy in a way. It's not so fast-paced and twisty, plotty like some of the ones I'm used to reading, for example. But I mean, it's such a well-developed world, and it's really based on the characters. And even from the first series or the first book, I can see the small breadcrumbs laid out which will be picked up in the future and maybe expanding to expand the world. So there's not everything necessarily explained, and I like it because I know that at some point I'm gonna understand it, and I don't need to understand everything from the start. I feel that a lot of fantasy books today have these where they make this mistake in a way where they want us to know, where the author wants us to know all the world. So they're like pages and pages and pages of exposition. You really are expected to immerse yourself and just find things out together with the main character in this case. I think this is similar to Brandon Sanderson's the Stormlight Archive series. There as well, even from the start, you have this feeling that this world is enormous and the world building is enormous, and it's the same way here. You don't know everything, but you don't need to. You'll find out eventually, right? So at the start of the first book, which is Assassin's Apprentice, we meet Fitz. And he's young, he's like 6 or 7, and the people who raised him kind of abandoned him and deposited him with someone to take him to the palace because he's the bastard of the prince. So he gets to the palace and he's kind of really lonely. He doesn't know anyone. He doesn't have any connections. He's the bastard of the prince, so everyone looks down on him. But somehow he ends up being an assassin's apprentice. So he's going to be the king's assassin. So we kind of learn a lot about him and growing up. So in a way it feels like you get to know his whole life throughout this series. So you really get attached to him as a character. I really enjoy reading about Fitz. I mean, he's such a great character. He has a lot of great values and he's just a great upstanding guy. And I can't wait to see where this series will take him. The third most favorite fantasy series on this list is the WInternight Trilogy by Katherine Arden. I read this because this is a fantasy world inspired by Russian folklore. And that sounds really interesting. And it's also set in winter, and I haven't read a lot of books set in winter. I actually talked about this on my winter books recommendation video. I'll link it somewhere for you. So this is about a young girl, Vasia, who is a bit special. She has some magical abilities because she can see household spirits and creatures of the forest, which other people don't see. These are kind of creatures from folklore, and everyone thinks they're a superstition, but people lay out small offerings for them because that's just custom. But then this priest comes to town and he kind of brainwashes people in a way and tells them not to believe in these superstitious creatures. He wants everyone to turn to religion as the true faith. But these household spirits are actually alive, and bad things can happen if they are forgotten, if they're not cared for. It's such a great story that I think it kept me hooked. I'm not saying that it was an easy start, because it really read like folk tales in the beginning, but as you move forward you kind of move away from that and you get more and more involved in the story and you just get sucked in. So you really feel like you're in this winter landscape in Russia. I think it's really amazing what Katherine Arden did in this world and how this world is expanded then in the second book of this series. I haven't read the third and the concluding novel yet, but I'm highly anticipating reading that too, and I think I'm really gonna love it. My second favorite fantasy series of this year is the Nevernight Chronicles by Kristoff. I read the first 2 books in this series, and I'm planning to read very soon the third and concluding novel. So it's a funny story with this one because I actually started this series, Nevernight, like some years ago, 2-3 years ago, and I really couldn't get into it, so I just DNF'd it. And then for some reason this year I picked it up again in audio format, and it was the right thing to do. It's a lot of world building in this one, and there's a lot of side stories and there's a lot of information which some people find excessive, but I guess it really adds to the story. These kind of stories and extra information is added as footnotes. So some pages have less footnotes, other pages have more. Then if you go back and forth between the main between the main text and the footnote, it kind of takes you out of the story. So I understand in a way that some people really don't gel with that. But as an audio, the footnotes were kind of incorporated in the whole story. So this is like a Roman-inspired fantasy world where people live in this great city called God's Grave, which is built on the bones of this old dead god. But in this city, Mia and Mia's family are really part of the elite, but her father is accused of treason and executed. And then they go after her family as well. She barely escapes, and then she flees to the street, where she kind of finds that she has an affinity with shadows, so she has kind of a magical power. But people are still after her, so she has to hide. And then she somehow ends up meeting this old assassin. So Mia's plan is to become the best assassin in this world. And for that, she has to go to train at the assassin school, the Red Church. In the school of assassins, she really has to prove herself. She wants to be the best, to become the Blade. Because as the Blade, she will become skilled enough to be able to get revenge for her family's death. So this is basically an epic story of revenge, because that is Mia's main drive. There's this particular type of humor and quirkiness, which is, I think, typical to J. Kristoff, because I read both Illuminae and Aurora Rising, which he wrote together with Amy Kaufman, and they're all these kind of humorous, sassy, quirky books in a way. So if you love fantasy with humor, you should definitely pick this up. I think it's also pretty well known and really popular on BookTube, definitely. So you might have heard about it already. The best fantasy series I read this year is the Book of the Ancestor series by Mark Lawrence. Now, this series took me completely by surprise. I did not expect to like it so much. So in this world, everything is frozen over. Something happened in the past, so this is some sort of a post-apocalyptic world. Something happened in the very distant past which made the earth freeze over, so something happened to the moon. Now there's only a narrow corridor which is unfrozen and people only live there, so there's only a limited space of land, I guess, and there's people who are fighting over different territories. Now in this world we have different tribes, 4 different tribes, and each of these tribes are specific because they have some specific traits. Some people in these tribes can develop magical abilities, and these people are very sought after. Nona, our main character, is one of these persons. She ends up at the convent of Sweet Mercy, where she basically trains to be an assassin nun. So I think that's a pretty amazing premise, and the author is writing a second series in this world which comes out next year, so I will definitely pick that up. But why I like this one especially? I think Mark Lawrence is really good at not employing these tropes which are so prevalent in fantasy or in many fantasies. I don't want to generalize. And he's really creating a unique world with really well-developed characters. So there's no one perfectly good here or perfectly bad. There's a lot of moral gray characters, and I think they're pretty relatable because of that. So I really love how in this series there are a lot of female characters. I mean, most of these characters are actually female, and there's a lot of great female-female friendship. I think this is quite rare in fantasy, and I really appreciate Mark Lawrence for making this world female focused. So if you haven't picked up this series, I urge you to do so, because you will not regret it. So these are all the fantasy series I liked best this year. Have you heard of any of these? Have you read them? If so, please tell me what you thought about them. If you have any other great fantasy series you would like to recommend me, please tell me in the comments below, because I'm always on the lookout for more great books to read. But this is where I leave you today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.